Well, everybody, it's exciting for me to have one of my newest, and I'm going to say this, dearest friends in the youth ministry world. Kevin Yee is joining us, the man, the myth, the legend from Southern California. Kevin, how are you?
Very, very, very good right now.
Good,
Yes.
good. And Kevin, we've known each other. We were talking before we started to record here for about 4 years.
Mhm.
And we met down in Dallas, and I just had a blast. It was like for me, I don't know what it was like for you, but for you and with your wife, Tracy, when we first started to talk, it just was, to me, it was like
Yes.
that because there
Yeah.
was this clear shared bond of, not only love for Christ and his kingdom, but for kids and parents and our youth ministry world. So tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing there in Southern California.
Yeah. So I am in Northridge, California. Our church is called Church Every Day. We're about 20 minutes north of the city of LA proper. It's a Korean American church, and I have been there for the last 15 years doing youth ministry. And this past year, transitioned over to doing college and young adults.
And I think it's worth mentioning your other thing that you're into, because I find this fascinating, right?
I'm also the host of a podcast called Thanos to Theos, which is all about sort of where the comic book world meets our faith and our Christianity. And we do a little bit of cultural analysis as well. My co-hosts love CPYU and the ministry that Walt's done. And so we've learned a lot from him. And so we are practically applying those principles to comic books and comic book movies.
Yeah. And if you're interested, folks, you actually can go onto our website. And we had those three guys on, Kevin and his buddies there talking about their podcast, but we had it on our Youth Culture Matters podcast. And that was a fun conversation because I was completely lost,
Yes.
which really made it great. So, and I think those guys love harassing me, and I'll give it back to them as well. But you also have worked as an animator.
Oh, that's right. Yes. So I was bivocational for most of my pastoral career. I worked in the animation industry as a video editor and associate producer.
Yeah.
As a small independent animation studio, we did things for Cartoon Network Latin America, Cartoon Network in Europe, and in Asia as well. Nothing for the United States, but yeah. So I've definitely got a background in media and a background in storytelling and all those things. Yes.
Yeah. So Kevin, it's been fun to converse with him. And one of the things I love about Kevin is his a sense of what's happening in culture. And, I learned from Kevin. And Kevin, just, from where you sit, it's been a crazy year, obviously.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've seen that you're most concerned about in terms of culture as someone who's doing ministry with students and families?
Yeah. I think so. The two things that I've been talking about a lot with other youth workers, I actually just got back from a conference where I was every day engaging with a number of youth workers, was this idea that sexuality, gender, and racial justice. So those would be the three things that I think we as the church really need to understand, that if we're not discipling our students in these things, there is a worldview that's already out there that has captured their mind and hearts. This is not something that's coming for them. This is something that's built into the world that's around them. And one of the things that I've been sharing is, with the millennial generation, of which I consider myself sort of the grandpa of the millennial generation, right in between the Gen X and millennials. I would say that a lot of the millennials have deconstructed because of issues regarding sexuality. And so a lot of what we grew up with, later on, we abandoned those things. We abandoned the faith really because of confusion regarding sexuality and issues with regards to homosexuality specifically, I would say. And then when it comes to Generation Z, I think we have definitely those issues with regards to sexuality, but now issues with regards to gender and issues with regards to racial justice. So how do we understand those things, and how do we teach that to students and help parents also disciple their students in these things, because those are fundamental to your identity. And so because of that, I feel like if as the church, we're not discipling our students into those things now, when they go to college, I mean, these things are the assumed worldview of much of the campuses that they're going to be going to. And so I fear that we're going to lose yet another generation to things that, again, the Bible talks about so much, but we just have not been equipped very well to be able to take these things to their level, and to talk about how the gospel transforms our identity, and really helps us to work through our own racial and ethnic identity and our own gender identity as well. And so those are things that I think we really need to be focused in on and honing in on with the next generation.
Yeah. And Kevin, one of the things I love about what you do is you take these issues on and you bring the light of God's word to bear on these realities that exist. And I know, because I've had conversations with you, you send a large majority of your student population that you work with and you minister to off to the university. And so you stay in touch with those students when they leave, and you're totally aware of the challenges that they face. And I very much appreciate what you said. Boy, I wish this was across the board. And this is something we're really working hard to convince youth workers to do: ministry to parents. And I know you're actively involved. You're a dad yourself, and we want our parents to nurture their kids in the faith. Can you just talk a little bit to our folks here about how you, in your particular setting there, which is unique, a Korean American church, which many of our folks are not really familiar with that, but can you talk about how you've benefited and benefited from and been able to use what we're doing here at CPYU?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have been a huge fan of CPYU for a long time, even before I got to meet Walt. So when I met you, Walt, for that first time,
diminished after that. Yeah.
But your blogs on culture have been so helpful. Because so one thing about culture is it is global. American culture goes everywhere. And so regardless of whether we're a Korean American church or a Chinese American church or a Latino church down the street, like our students are engaged in the same culture. And that's been true of the millennials and the Gen Z for a long time, because the internet has kind of flattened out the differences all across the country, across racial and ethnic divides. And so CPY has been so helpful in that regard, because how do you absorb all the culture that the students are going to? So it's so helpful to have somebody who's been doing this for so long say, these are the things that are important. These are the things that we should be focused in on. And so that's been really helpful. But more than that, actually, this past year, there were the family table talk devotionals that Walt, you did. I was able to write one. You even invited my wife to be able to write one. But our church actually took those and translated over a month of them. I believe we did 40 of them, to be able to hand to parents to be able to use as a resource for when California was on the strictest period of lockdown, to be able to sit together and do ministry together. And I can't tell you how many families came back and were just like, this is really, really helpful. And they started, actually, some families who have never done any sort of devotional time previously have now done regular devotional times together. With different books, with just the Bible and different things like that. But these table talk devotionals sort of help to shape how those conversations should work, and really eased a lot of the awkwardness, because we did the translation into the Korean language, and really eased the anxiety for parents to have to like figure out, how do I read something that's in English and then talk to my children about it? So that was already taken care of. And so that's been a good resource. And we've been able to give that to other smaller Korean churches that have, even less resources than we do. And so I know that's been a blessing kind of across the board for a lot of Korean churches.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I tell you, that's so encouraging to me, because when COVID hit, and I remember back to March 13th, I started to think to myself, okay, what do we do now? Is everything going to shut down? And a lot of people in ministries were saying, is this the end? And you and I have talked about how God has used this time to help us step back, make adjustments. Right. And in many ways, ministry has been thriving. So I really appreciate you, Kevin, and the feedback you've given us. And I know that our donors, our ministry partners, are appreciative of hearing your story. I know there's much more to it, but thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, I would love to say thank you to the donors for sure. One thing that I would love for the donors to understand and know is that, again, I just coming off a really large national conference and have talked to so many youth pastors from smaller churches. And so when an organization, when a nonprofit is able to have resources, good resources available for free, I'm telling you, there are places that these things go to that we would never imagine. Small churches in places where it's like cities and towns we've never heard of, but it's in these places where there's a real heart for the youth. And these are pastors who they're not hoping for any sort of platform or anything like that. They're just there to love the kids in their communities. And these are the kinds of resources that really, really help these students to have lifelong faith and helps these youth workers do ministry without burning out. That is a huge thing, to be able to put free resources in the hands of youth workers. And the best part is that when a youth worker is able to have these kinds of resources and talk to parents, they instantly gain credibility.
Yeah.
And that's really, really important and so key. And so just want to thank the donors for really being able to give at that level. The Spirit is doing things through your generosity that you'll never know until you get to heaven. And we're going to hear those stories, and we're going to celebrate for all of eternity the work that you guys have done.
Thanks, Kevin. And I know you've had great credibility with the parents you work with, but we're happy to help you have more credibility.
Yes, always.
Hey, thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Walt. Yeah.